June 1944. The Second World War had reached a critical moment. The only way to stop Hitler in his tracks and to reclaim lost territory was to launch the largest seaborne invasion in history, the moment that became known as D-Day.
You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you.
The D-Day invasion was spearheaded by paratroopers. Leaping into the unknown, their job was to prevent enemy reinforcements. Without their actions, Allied victory in the West would not have been possible.
I have to tell you, everybody says we're heroes, and that isn't true. We volunteered to do this, we trained to do it, and we were paid to do it. That does not make you a hero.
There could have been no spearhead and no paratroopers without the workhorses of the sky, the Douglas C-47s, the airplanes that flew in their hundreds across the English Channel to Normandy. Charged with delivering the airborne divisions to their rendezvous with destiny, one airplane had to lead the way.
It seemed totally beyond comprehension that the airplane that led the D-Day invasion, this incredibly important artifact, would be in a scrapyard. There's just no way that that can be true.
I just had a feeling there's something special about this airplane. And he said, well, that airplane was the lead plane into Normandy.
This is the story of the men who found and who were determined to restore this iconic aircraft, of the plane's part in one defining moment in history, and of a dream that she should fly again back to the coast of France to commemorate the 75th anniversary of D-Day. That's All Brother, the plane that led the D-Day invasion. Continuing the story of That's All Brother from her discovery and early stage restoration to the success of her first flight. She was installed at her new home at Centex. Dedicated teams completed her interior fittings and exterior paintwork, including the faithful reproduction of her nose art. Relatives of the former crew and paratroopers took part in an emotional relaunch at Oshkosh Airshow. There was distressing news of the sudden demise of her sister aircraft, Bluebonnet Belle, and renewed concerns that an oil leak in That's All Brother's left engine had become noticeably worse. Now the pressure to return That's All Brother to France is beginning to mount significantly. After so many long days, weeks and months, the horizon of Normandy is finally coming into view. As the work on That's All Brother's stricken engine continues, the CAF are reminded that such occurrences were not uncommon during wartime. Many new C-47s had similar engine problems before they reached the combat theatre. Pathfinder pilot David Hamilton recalls one such event in North Africa.
Going overseas, we flew the southern route, and I came up and lost an engine trying to get through the pass in Marrakesh. So I went to Agadir on the coast of Morocco, figuring, oh, they'll send an engine down when we notify them from the air material up at Casablanca. Homestead Field, Florida, they sent the engine. It took me 10 days to get to me. My crew chief, my radio operator, my co-pilot and I, and two guys from the PBY Naval School, because same engine in the PBY. We changed the engine, got it to work fine. I eventually got in, checked into Casablanca to air material because I had to have it cleared. And Bob Hoover was the captain clearance officer. And he said, is the airplane flying fine? I said, yes, just going great, no problem. He said, sign here, boom, have a good trip. And I went to England.
The engine suppliers and the team at Basler had been hard at work. To everyone's great relief, the engine repair was completed successfully, and once again, the Pratt & Whitney power plant was reunited with That's All Brother. The process requires great patience as well as skill. the team take all the time required to carefully position and reattach the repaired engine. It is vital to keep to the schedule and to ensure the success of her mission that this all goes according to plan.
You're looking exactly the same.
Central to the events that led up to D-Day and to events marking the 75th anniversary, Greenham Common stands as witness to all that went before.
Greenham Common, England. When Eisenhower arrived here on June the 5th, 1944, he had with him a retinue of press corps, the media. He had made a famous uplifting speech for the morale of the men. But Eisenhower had the weight of the world on his shoulders, and he knew beyond that morale-boosting speech, everything might fail. In the event of it going disastrously wrong, Eisenhower had prepared a letter to be issued accepting full responsibility for the failure of D-Day. Happily, that version of history did not happen. Not far from where I'm standing stood That's All Brother. Donaldson and Daniel were doing their pre-flight checks. The aircraft had been readied by the ground crew, working hard to make sure everything was as prepared as it could be for the vital mission being flown that night. The men were anxiously waiting to board. They wanted to get on and get it over with. They knew they were going into combat and they had been waiting and preparing for hours. Last letters home, checking the pouches, sharpening the bayonets once more, and getting the haircuts, the Mohican haircuts, competing with one another for those blackened faces with red or white stripes. Who could look the most ghoulish? And then waiting to take off as the sun set on June the 5th, 1944.
The history and importance of Greenham Common is not lost on the CAF team as they too come to see where the events of D-Day began.
Well, right now we're headed out to Greenham Common, and this is where That's All Brother and the rest of the 438 launched from on the night of D-Day. And it's interesting to see the countryside. It's very pretty, rolling hills here, and it had to be a lot different for all the people who were serving over here. Coming from various places across the U.S. Donaldson came from Birmingham, and other members of the crew were from Alabama as well. And it must have just been, quite a shock to come to such a different place to do, such an important task.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Great to meet you. Chris Bolton.
Andy Mag, nice to meet you.
Jim Lash. Hello, Jim. Hi, good to meet you.
Joe.
Great to meet you, Joe. Hi, great to meet you. Well, welcome to Greenham Control Tower. So it's recently been refurbished. It fell into a state of disrepair from when the airbase was sort of became unoperationable. And over a period of years, a lot of people put together a campaign to restore it. As Greenham Trust, we gave £250,000 towards restoration. It's about £1 million project. So we'll go and take a walk inside.
Oh, that would be great.
Here we are. Lovely to see you here. Welcome. This is where it all happened. This is where the air controllers sat and guided in the planes. The building wasn't in fact used very much because in the Cold War era there weren't really that many planes. They were just constantly on alert, and the planes arrived in 90-day cycles.
Right.
So often it was empty.
Obviously the Gamma site, the former missile silos, you can see there now.
Young people here they don't know anything about the airbase. They don't know it was an airbase either.
Sure, right.
Yeah, there's no real connection because you go and talk to local groups of school children. Of course, they don't know what the Cold War was even.
No.
Right. No, it's great when you can preserve history in a way that is accessible to the community and people will use.
Well, we're out on Greenham Common. We're kind of walking toward the runways, and this used to be a SAC base, but before it was that, it was a base that was used by the U.S. Army Air Corps in 1944. And so we're going to kind of walk to the middle here, where there's a little pad of concrete from the old concrete runway.
Yep.
But where that lies is also where the grass runways intersected. There were 3 runways here in 1944. So we're just going to go take a look at it and see what it looks like.
Well, it's neat to think that, almost 75 years ago, the plane we operate today is, took off right from here and to, go off to such an important mission.
And not only that's all brother, but how many other C-47s left here that same morning?
Yeah, it was at least 50 took off from this base, and they actually took off from many different bases and then formed up a little ways away from here. But all told, it was over 800 C-47s involved in the main paratroop drop.
I bet it would have been something to see.
That would have been pretty neat to see. Well, yeah, if you look around here, if you were here in 1944, not only would you have had the runways and the base and all the facilities there, but there would have been so many aircraft here just off to the sides between C-47s, CG-4s, Horsa gliders as well. It was, quite an operation because after the airborne invasion, they ran another nighttime glider mission, and then the next day they ran even more glider missions as well from here.
For me, it's always just it's an opportunity to put yourselves in the shoes of an 18-year-old kid or a 21-year-old pilot, I always think about sort of the courage to keep taking another step forward into the aircraft. That had to be a pretty big thing for them. And so every time I'm at one of these places, it kind of brings you a little closer to that, and you realize, wow, that was a huge thing that those soldiers did for us.
And what we get to do is a luxury, and what they did was a necessity, and it was a very risky business, and many aircraft were lost and many lives were lost on D-Day.
Yeah, so I think that's the primary thing, is it's not really fun is not the word. This is an honor to be able to do this.
Yeah.
But you always have to be respectful of what it really was. It was men going off to fight a war.
Yep.
Many of them going off.
And not coming back.
So.
But because of what they did,
we're standing here.
We're standing here. And, we get to do the things we do today, and we owe them a huge debt of gratitude.
Just as the CAF are paying a poignant visit to Greenham Common to pay their respects, Matt and Ken in Alabama find an appropriate moment to pay their respects too, this time at the grave of the man who played such a crucial part.
This whole story starts with him. If it hadn't been for him, we wouldn't have found the airplane. We never set out to find the airplane. We're strictly researching his life, so it all goes back to him. He kind of goes away in the 60s. He retires, especially at that point. Not a whole lot of people want to hear about war at all, much less, at that time he's a major general. And so, no, he just, one of those stories that kind of fades away. And I don't know, hopefully with the airplane being restored and coming back here to Alabama in a couple of months, maybe that'll kind of renew the interest in it. But no, very few know about it. And I'm sure if they did, obviously they'd be proud to have a native son being in such an important part of history. I think Ken and I would both agree the day we talked, we'd like to see it restored to the way it was the day it flew on D-Day and let it continue flying. That's happened. So, I think our greatest hopes have already been realized. I don't think we would have even thought about taking it back to France. And so the fact that it's going back to Normandy and flying over you know, the exact same route that it flew before, dropping paratroopers again. That's all icing on the cake as far as I'm concerned.
The CAF have returned home with a heightened sense of their mission. As we learned before, the trip across the Atlantic cannot be undertaken without a significant number of spares. Not least of these is a minimum of one backup engine.
What we've had arrive here is a spare engine for our C-47, an 1830-92 that's been overhauled. And that'll get us through any problems that we've got of any engines. Came from Idaho, Anderson Aeromotive. I've got to take a look and make sure that everything looks like it's undamaged and everything's there. So let's take a look and see what they sent us. That's a pretty engine. This one is what we call an IRAN engine, inspect and repair as necessary, or replace as necessary. So it hasn't had a full overhaul, but it's a complete engine that's been built, is ready to run, and we can just bolt it on the plane and go if we need to. This would more likely be an emergency engine. If I had a problem in the field with the plane and I had to replace an engine, I can put this one on there and it will reliably get me back here where we can send the other engine off for overhaul and get the plane back where we can actually work on it. We're really kind of shaking it out right now with the test flying that we're doing. I say test flying. We're taking it to shows. Our pilots are getting qualified. We're putting hours on it. We've got about 50 hours on it since March when the plane was delivered to us. We're working hard, the CAF's working hard, and all of the vendors that are working with us, everybody's really pitching in to get this done just right.
The logistics are every bit as demanding as they are important. The CAF calls a meeting to refine the plans.
The airplane's going to start in San Marcos. We're flying to New Orleans, Lakeland, Florida, Birmingham, Alabama, Atlanta, and Dover, Delaware, and then we're going to end up at Oxford, Connecticut. And then from there, that's when the trip starts. And so on the 18th, we're going to go from Oxford to, I believe, Goose Bay, and then across to Narsarsuaq. I think that's how you pronounce that. And then to Relic, and then across to Prestwick. And then we'll park in Prestwick for a week or so, and then move down to Duxford. We'll be doing a lot of airshow stuff at Duxford. It's actually a little short for our SOP, but we're gonna make an exception for it.
How long is it?
4,800 feet, I think. We're doing some flyovers of some strategic areas on the way. We crossed the channel. This is about a 2-hour flight, and we're going to be landing in Caen. Depart on the 18th of May, come back around the last week of June. Well, and maybe the first week of July.
All the while in wartime France, the resistance had been on standby for many weeks, awaiting word of the forthcoming invasion. At last, D-Day was imminent.
The resistance were working with the Allies. Communication was going backwards and forwards across the channel, and the resistance were waiting for a particular message. And that message came on the evening of June the 5th, the second part of a message that told them the invasion was on. Immediately they started to disrupt German communications, telephone lines cut, telegraph poles destroyed, train tracks blown up, trains misdirected, anything to disrupt and prevent the Germans bringing through reinforcements to assist the Allies.
On Greenham Common, ahead of the invasion force, the very first wave was leaving, the Pathfinder planes, carrying troops capable of setting up strategic radar beacons needed to guide the main wave to the predetermined drop zones. At long last, D-Day proper was underway.
We had a final briefing and relaxed, went through the sand tables again, the drop procedure. Then we slept and ate a little. And then we went out to the plains at around, I'd say maybe 7:30 or 8 o'clock. And then we took off, and 3 ship formations. The 101st took off first. They had a little further to go. And the 82nd planes, 9 of us, we took off later. The last 2 planes were the drop zones for the glider landing. There was a fog bank, unreported, over the drop area. And nobody broke radio silence to let us know. But amazingly, we stuck in formation. And drop zone T-Tear had 3 planes drop in there, and the drop was perfect. The flak was intense, but small arms. And I had lots of holes in my airplane, but mostly 25 caliber Schmeiser machine pistol, which will give you an idea of how low I was after I got rid of my troopers. Because I dropped my troopers starting at 800 feet, got down to about 680, then they pulled in the static lines and I hit the deck. And we had to lift our right wing to go by the church steeple of St. Mary Glees. And the only 101st had 1 drop zone where the plane had to do a 360 and go back, but it eventually, every Pathfinder landed in his drop zone.
When the day came, every airbase in the southeast and beyond had a full part to play. The fighter squadrons of Mustangs, for example, providing cover and protection, as well as causing as much disruption as possible to enemy forces, were fully engaged.
This is Bottisham Airfield.
Yep.
So what units were based here?
This was the home to the 375th Fighter Squadron.
Of the 361st?
Fighter Group, yeah, flying Mustangs on D-Day. They were flying combat air patrols. They took off before dawn and landed after dusk, basically just stopping any enemy fighters getting through to the airborne forces. They didn't want the German fighters tangling with the Dakotas.
Oh, because they would have massacred them, wouldn't
they?
they?
Would, yeah. So it's very important to provide that safety net.
So it was a shield. This was part of a big Allied shield then,
basically,
protecting the...
Eisenhower put all his fighter groups in an umbrella around the beaches to stop anything getting through.
And this is the actual room that the briefing occurred that morning. So the tension here must have been palpable then as those young men came in, knowing that something really big was going down.
Yeah, I can't begin to imagine people sitting in this room learning the news that you're going to be landing in France and you're providing that umbrella and you're expected to be in the air nearly the whole day and land a Mustang at night. It must have been a fairly hectic day.
Where was the briefing screen then? Where was the stage?
It would have been huge. Basically, we've got a photograph of the squadron commander standing a couple of steps behind you. Big map of Europe on this wall here. He's got a pointer. He's showing the guys where the targets are, where their designated areas to fly. And there's a status board here on the wall behind you, telling them what flights they're in, what machines they're flying that day. This is where they'd have learned what they were doing.
And here we're in the heart of East Anglia, and the skies would have been very, very congested on that morning then, I guess.
I can't begin to imagine it. Every fighter group was in the air, most bomber groups were in the air, and you've got Transport Command flying the airborne forces in. I mean, it must have been hectic.
Yes, I think from an historian's viewpoint, you can only imagine the sounds that there must have been shaking this building that morning as the aircraft thundered out.
So you can imagine 70 Mustangs starting up at once, the noise that must have made.
When did they put the stripes on the aircraft?
I think it was on the evening of the 5th.
So they were busy. So they would have seen all the hubbub going on of painting their beautiful, nicely polished Mustangs with these ghastly black and white stripes.
Yeah, and they were just quickly thrown on because they had to do 60, 70 aircraft in about 3 or 4 hours, so it wasn't a precision job.
Did they fly more than one mission that day?
They did. They flew 6 missions that day,
Six missions?
6 missions, They split the group up into 2 halves, and they kept one group in the air all day.
gracious. So did they have any engagements with enemy aircraft that day?
They certainly did, yes. They shot down, I think there was one plane destroyed, and they shot up quite a lot of tanks and enemy patrols.
Of course, trying to prevent enemy forces getting through to the beaches.
Yeah.
So they were strafing anything?
Yeah, anything that moved, yeah.
In the closing minutes of June the 5th, the first wave of C-47s with the paratroopers aboard, led by That's All Brother and Donaldson, took off en route to Normandy. By now, though, the enemy forces were on full alert, and their passage over was anything but smooth.
Going across, it was, you could look down and see all those ships down there, and you realized that this was the largest armada of ships that anybody has ever seen. People have asked me if we were afraid. No, we were not afraid. There was a little apprehension because we'd never done this before. But that also worked in the fact that we weren't afraid because we didn't know we'd never done it. We didn't know how bad this was going to be. So we came close to the coast, then the clouds rolled in. We were flying in serials of 9 planes. The first plane in each serial was the only one that had a navigator. There was on the ground a thing called a Eureka. It would send a beam up to the plane. They had a Rebecca. There were those, in every area they had a guy on the ground with the Eureka, and you're supposed to home in on him. What happened when they got into this cloud bank, we were flying almost propeller to tail. So the first thing they did, self-preservation, scatter, or we're going to wreck. In doing that, they lost the navigator. So the 8 planes behind him had no idea where they were because the navigator was gone. They were so certain because of the time element that they had flown that they were dropping people in the right place, and they were not. It was good and bad. It was bad because our plan fell apart. It was good because it confused the Germans. They just had no idea of how many people there were. All they knew was that every place they looked, there was paratroopers. And as far as actual fear, I stood in the door and looked out, and I felt no fear at the time, and I've talked to the other guys, and none of them had said the same thing. It was fascinating. You could see all of those heavy caliber tracers coming up. Every 5th shell that was coming up was a tracer, but it looked solid. They were hitting the planes next to us. There were planes blowing up. They were coming up through, hitting people in the plane. And we were so low that the ground fire from machine guns was coming up through the planes. And all we could think of then was, let's get out of here.
Despite the thickening fog banks and the associated challenges for the rudimentary radar, Donaldson found his way to the drop zone.
Well, studying the maps, we think we're now pretty much on the spot where That's All Brother deposited the paratroops on board her aircraft. She put, through Donaldson's courage, her men where they were meant to be. And that was the time, the green light and out. They were helpless. They feared as they leapt out of the aircraft and descended from the skies here that they would be machine gunned, and many were. In the darkness, they were trying to find one another. They had their little clickers. Was it somebody friendly? Hopefully you got a responding click. It would be one of your men. Then 1, 2, 3 others gathered. Around 75 of them made a textbook attack on Saint-Marie-de-Mont. They positioned machine guns to enfilade the enemy, and they went in, almost leapfrogging, building to building. And in a brief, fierce combat there, they took the church. And within hours, many objectives had been achieved, which made it possible then for the troops coming up from the beaches to proceed to some extent as planned. And through the night into the early hours of the morning, that bitter, vicious combat went on. But slowly but surely, the Americans gained the upper hand?
Our objective for my battalion, or my company, was 2 bridges near Brevans. One was a pedestrian bridge and one a vehicle bridge. Those were built a few months before we went over to funnel reinforcements down to the beach forces. That was critical that we had to stop that. We did take the bridges the first day.
The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions were in action 33 and 24 days respectively. The 82nd, having captured Saint-Mère-Église and secured the bridgehead across the Mer de Ré River, destroyed other river crossings, protected the flank of the 7th Army Corps, and drove west to the Douve River. The 101st seized the areas assigned it, destroyed bridges, and drove on to Carentan to establish a defense area there.
We were supposed to be in there 3 days. That's what shock troops do. They are not defensive people ordinarily. But they had nobody else to put in. It was harder than they thought, so they decided to keep us in. We were in it for 33 days before we went back to England.
Dropping the paratroops and their part in preparing the way proved vital for the wave after wave of ground troops who landed amid such heavy fire on the beaches. Though many pilots had not found their predetermined drop zones, due in large part to the fog, the paratroops' role proved crucial in opening up lines through which the Allied forces could advance. As part of her preparations, That's All Brother regularly takes to the air, not least of all to put time on her freshly repaired engine. Today, she adds extra purpose to her flight, this time to Dayton, Ohio, to reconnect with a familiar face and one of the original paratroopers, Jim Pee Wee Martin.
Have a good flight. Be careful.
Today we are flying That's All Brother up to Dayton, Ohio to meet with Pee Wee Martin. Pee Wee was one of the original Toccoa band of brothers. He jumped on D-Day with 101st Airborne, and he actually jumped at the 70th anniversary of D-Day when he was 92 years old. He helped a lot in the initial fundraising and getting together for That's All Brother when we made the initial presentation and all. So we are taking That's All Brother to Dayton, Ohio today, and his family's going to bring him out here. We're hoping that he's going to be in good enough health that he's going to be able to get in and take a ride with us. We'll take he and his family for a ride in the airplane that he jumped, not the airplane, but the type of airplane that he jumped out of 75 years ago next month. On D-Day, there were 800 airplanes that took off carrying paratroopers, carrying gliders, and they all followed this airplane. There are a lot of warbirds out there that are painted up like famous airplanes, but they're not really the airplane. This is the airframe that was that led everything at D-Day. This trip we're on today really provides us with a great opportunity to take the airplane on some very long legs, and we can validate our fuel burns and our oil consumption. And there's been a lot of things that have come up on this trip that have just been good pointers. And it's a little chilly today, so we're getting a little experience with how the airplane operates in the cold. Because, you know, in about 6 weeks, we're going to launch out to go across the North Atlantic on the same blue spruce routes that C-47s flew to Europe by the thousands in World War II. I think this airplane really has been a defining airplane for the CAF. You know, we've got 170 airplanes scattered all across the country, and you know, most of our airplanes have never went overseas and don't have a lot of historical provenance. This airplane, hands down, is the most historically significant airplane that we have in the CAF fleet. And because of its historical significance, it allowed us the opportunity to raise money in a much more effective way than we typically are able to do. And that allowed us to bring this airplane up to an incredibly high standard in terms of restoration. So I really think that's something new and really exciting for the CAF.
On the approach to Dayton, it is clear that the weather is worsening. As That's All Brother comes into land, there's no disguising the onset of a snowstorm.
37 degrees, 2,500 snow for visibility. Getting pretty marginal right there, but then it's clear.
3,000 overcast is what this shows.
Two concerns now are the temperature and visibility. Despite these, the crew are keen to put That's All Brother through her wintertime paces, with the upcoming Atlantic crossing very much in mind.
Hey Pee Wee, how are you? Good. Good to see you.
Hello, sir. How are you? All right, very good. Hung on. Wow. Here we go. Keep it up. What do you think?
Yeah, that's true. Yes, I could have.
After a short but emotional flight, That's All Brother returns to the airfield and, with visibility mercifully improved, lands safely.
We have heard people over and over and over and say, "Thank you for your sacrifice." I have never considered my service a sacrifice. I have always considered it an honor and a privilege to have been a part of history. And I sincerely mean that, because I'm just a little guy, a country bumpkin, and all of a sudden I'm thrust in the limelight because I went to Normandy. See, and what's important now about all of this restoration and what you are doing right now is that we're going to be gone, and you're going to be the last people to have talked to somebody that's actually been there, and you're going to preserve that. You think about that. There is no glory in combat, believe me. There's no glory. There is afterwards, but not while you're doing it. I'm not usually emotional, but I'm emotional today.
Bring whatever looks good. Okay.
Thank you.
And I thank all of you people for what you've done for me.
Well, thank you.
Jim clearly cherished his brief flight, although he had originally jumped from a different C-47. That's All Brother, though, has plenty of stories of her own.
Dads, uncles, grandfathers, the men that flew this airplane had touched people's lives. The photos were still out there, the family albums, the archives, the information, and stories like Chappie Hall and his role as Jumping Jesus, this airborne paratrooper chaplain who jumped with the men. He had been noticing that paratroopers weren't attending his masses and his services, and he figured out that it was because there was a reticence to visit his services because he himself wasn't a jumper. So he decided to go and receive jump training, and he noted that there was a massive increase in the number of men who came to his services and his masses after he came back with his jump wings. Now, Hall was interesting not only for the fact that he went and became jump qualified as a chaplain, which at that time wasn't required, but that he chose to accompany the men to Normandy on the D-Day mission. Now, a chaplain could be argued to be not necessarily essential personnel in that first wave, but he felt strongly that as shepherd to those men, that he should endure the same challenges that they do, and basically go over there with them. So he joined the unit on board That's All Brother, and he basically jumped right behind Old Mo Mosley, who was the unit's commanding officer. And in the airborne, there's a culture of, the officer is always leading the way. He's always the first one out of the airplane. And Mosley was no different. They weren't the only unique characters on the airplane. In fact, David Daniel, the commander of the 87th Troop Carrier Squadron, to which That's All Brother belonged, brought along his Scottish Terrier. Now, we had this sort of obscure reference to there being a Scottish Terrier on board the airplane, sat upon a stack of flak jackets from the memoirs of Chappie Hall. But it would be some months later during the crowdfunding campaign that we were actually shown a picture of the dog. The crew, when they returned to England, was photographed, and we were all looking at it really interestingly, thinking, wow, this is the crew as they return. Look at the load of stress that's off their shoulders, but they're also weary from a long mission. And we had the picture in our hands for a couple of days before someone finally said, did you guys see the dog in the middle of the picture? And sure enough, this black Scotty is in David Daniel's arm, and you can see his eyes reflecting the flash, and that's basically the only way you see him, but he's cradled right there in his arm.
Wings over Dallas. The airshow provides the final opportunity to run a full dress rehearsal for the That's All Brother crew and paratroopers. Full period uniforms, round chutes, and perfect flying conditions. With luck, exactly what they will find when jumping in France in June.
So right now I'm hooking up all my communications. I have a radio so that I can talk to the drop zone safety officer, and then I've got a helmet that I'm going to wear with communications with the air crew and all the radios for the air show. So I've got to get myself wired up to be ready for the communications. I'm also going to be making sure that my safety hookup is secure. In this case today, I'm wearing a parachute rig instead of just a safety harness. So if there's a problem, I'll be able to go out the aircraft by parachute instead of having to stay with the airplane.
Despite the perfect weather conditions, there are many matters for the jump master to consider. Wind strength, direction, and the speed of the aircraft must be finely judged. The jump only goes ahead on his command. An airshow inevitably means a very crowded airspace too, and more than ever, safety considerations are paramount.
When you stumble into a story as big as That's All Brother, as the airplane that led the invasion, having gone missing and been found, that airplane is fundamentally important. The D-Day narrative, the experience of the men who fought in that battle, and the importance of this relic are connected with what it means to be an American. These airplanes represent, or specifically this airplane, represents an incredible piece of the cultural commonwealth of America. A part of what makes us who we are today is wrapped up in this machine. Those men who were on board flew over willing to risk their lives, knowing full well they wouldn't all make it back, in the cause of global freedom. This airplane has already lasted longer than any of the men who flew it that night or who jumped from it that night. And that is a small taste of how important it is, because for generations to come, this airplane will represent the only real link to that time. This airplane will be a time machine that reminds people that it was real, that those challenges were there, that tyranny was a problem, and that people were willing to stand up and sort of fight for what was right.
At last, the day has come. That's All Brother has completed her astonishing restoration from boneyard to, very soon, battlefield. She's undergone every form of preparation and proved herself worthy in all tests and under all conditions. Now she is ready for her return to France. But first, the arduous Atlantic Bridge crossing must be negotiated. Every journey begins with a single step. For That's All Brother, en route to France, that means a trip from Texas to New Orleans. She will have to visit 5 other states before leaving US airspace, before realizing the dreams of the CAF and all those who have brought her this far, before revisiting her defining moment. 75 years on, and counting.